I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of the Top 10 of the 2010s. And this week we're once again starting a new genre with the Top 10 family films of the decade. In this video we're going to be talking about my picks from 10 to 7, including 5 honorable mentions. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is I talk about some of my favorite movies of the decade. This is once again an example of a start of a new genre, which is what we do every 3 weeks, where I do a different genre and give my top 10 list of said genre. But as we're starting to go further down the line, we're going to be continuing to do the genre movies, but we're going to be a little bit more abstract in a sense. Next week we're going to be doing the top 10 scores of the decade. The week after that we're going to be doing the top 10 performances of the decade. So while there's still some sort of genre type movies to come, I want to give myself some time to watch a lot of movies and be prepared. That's why for in between some of these videos now, as I start to learn more about, say, foreign films, which is I'm expecting to be a future episode, I do want to do some more abstract things, for example scores or performances, because I think that just fits within the sort of genre. And also, as we're sort of updating the Oscar schedule, this series will continue longer than normal in terms of my other Masters of Controlled Chaos series or my Old on Old series before. Because the Oscars being pushed back, I don't want to start the Oscars in my usual time during, say, mid-October, where we'll just sort of have not a lot of news to talk about and the season hadn't really started. Right now, because the Oscars have been pushed about 2 months, I'm expecting the movies to be and the old Oscar countdown series to actually start about mid-December, so that same sort of 4-month time frame, of which the series will still continue and still have different types of more abstract, like I said, but also biopics and foreign films and things like that. So lots of great stuff to come. I hope you've been enjoying the series, and let me know some of your favorite family films in the comments down below. But without further ado, jump into some of the honorable mentions, with the first honorable mention being Coco. From legendary animation studio and the kings of the animation, I guess, of the decade of the 2010s, Pixar. They somewhat struggled this decade with putting out more original films than, say, they did in the 2000s, often putting sequels, for as many Cocos as we got. We also got Finding Dory's and Monsters University's sequels to older films. Now, Coco, I think, though, is what the studio does best, and not to degrade those other movies. And there could be a Pixar sequel coming up later on in the actual list. But what I think Pixar does great is give us these original stories from unique perspectives that always sort of overwhelm and surprise us and give us a great story to appreciate for years to come. And really, they're the ultimate family movie kind of a studio, because as much as the movies are for kids, I think oftentimes that the movie is actually sometimes more for the adult. And there's a duality in that sense, that the kid can appreciate some of the themes, but the parent can just get just as much from it. And just like Coco really is just like any of Pixar's real best movies, in the sense that it's a pitch perfect storytelling with an emotional core, with great animation, and just a terrific idea with a terrific world. That so many Pixar movies, especially at the beginning, it's like, what if fish talk? What if toys talk? It was a unique world, a unique perspective. And similar here, we have a unique perspective and great storytelling and sort of a strong emotional core. Plus, Coco is a great family movie because it talks about the idea of family, and that theme of family is confronted head-on throughout the movie. Now, if you don't know, it's about a young boy named Miguel who lives in a town and his family hates music, although he loves music, and that sort of leads him to be rebellious. And when he finds out that his grandfather, his long-lost grandfather, is actually his idol, Ernesto de la Cruz, he accidentally stumbles into the land of the dead, and the only way he can get out and back into the land of the living is to find his long-lost grandfather of Ernesto de la Cruz. Now, the movie is really terrific because, like I said, it's got this sort of strong storytelling of, just that singular path of trying to find Ernesto de la Cruz, Coco, and he has his help with his friend, and he finds along the way Hector, and then that element, there's a strong emotional core, and it makes you feel at the very end, but also, and like I said, the wonderful animation, beautiful animation of the Land of the Dead in terrific colors, but it also confronts that theme of family, that Coco's living in this sort of matriarchal family that doesn't like music, and very quickly, with a great economy of storytelling, we understand Coco's feelings and his sort of place, and why he feels like an outsider, and why he's not really interested maybe in his family's shoe business that they're very proud of, but that's just not his sort of goals. Now, that does not to say that Coco disvalues family. Actually, quite the opposite. He's looking for family, and by making his idol Ernesto de la Cruz also be his grandfather, and making that family connection that only a family member can bring you back from the land of the dead into the land of the living. We allow for this theme of family to still persist, that Coco, that Miguel is still interested in the theme of family, that he may not find it in his current family, but that doesn't mean he disvalues family, that he's still interested in it with his family member who also loves music, being Ernesto de la Cruz. And then how the story sort of evolves from that, the great land of the dead world, and how they sort of explore that, which is just terrific. It's a movie I've watched a few times now. It's sort of like I guess I've always associated with like a fall, autumn type of movie, but it's Pixar really at its best, and it confronts the theme of family really terrifically. So check out Coco. My next pick is going to be Goosebumps. Halloween movies don't really exist. I think that most people, the Halloween movie or movies that they watch on Halloween are horror movies. Yet the people that actually, for the most part, participate in Halloween are the younger kids. So there's sort of a weird dichotomy there where a lot of younger kids go trick-or-treating, and that's, well, a huge part of Halloween, yet oftentimes there aren't movies directly for them. Now there's some Disney Channel original movies which I love, Halloween Town and Hocus Pocus and whatnot, but I actually think that Goosebumps is a great modern day equivalent, that it's not a scary movie, it's a spooky movie, that it's not necessarily going to not scare the kids, it's just not going to be Halloween or super gory or like really terrifying and frightening, that those are maybe for more of the teens. But in terms of the younger kids, I think that this is a movie for them while also still being exciting and entertaining enough for older family members. Now, this is once again a family movies episode. This is not a kids movies episode, so it has to work for both and really all members of the family, the kids, the adults, the teens, really a prototypical, we'll say, family. Now, Jack Black, if you know, plays R.L. Stine, the author of the Goosebumps books, when some kids come in and accidentally unleash all the monsters that he's written about. And so in this sort of structure, in this formula, we get the great sort of, we see over and over again, the old man versus the young kids kind of trope. Now, in Back to the Future, sometimes it feels a little bit weird, like, why are these guys actually friends? But in this, it makes sense because these kids are the ones that let go of R.L. Stine's books and allows for that sort of relationship. It's also great because we see all the sort of Goosebumps hits and all the different characters from very famous Goosebumps books, which if you read as a kid, you'll definitely really appreciate. And I think some of the, if your children, for example, are watching the movies, you'll appreciate that as well. I also think that the sort of entertaining and excitement of just trying to get all the monsters back into the book is exciting, and it's all over in this sort of one night. Jack Black is really terrific as R.L. Stine in a different kind of Jack Black role, more grumpy, a little bit angrier than usual, but still just as funny. Great dynamic between him and the kids. Some decent CGI, just trying to get the monsters back. And I think that overall, sort of this exciting, spooky adventure film that's not going to shy away from scaring the kids, because sometimes, you know, in a lot of family movies, there's just no scary elements whatsoever because they think kids may not handle it. But I think this is a great family movie because it will scare the kids, but just maybe not a super traumatic, we'll say, hot horror type of effect, while still being entertaining and exciting, and get that great Jack Black performance for some of the adults. Then my next pick is Hotel Transylvania, a movie series that doesn't get the great attention that it deserves, from director Genndy Tartakovsky, who also created Dexter's Laboratory and Samurai Jack, and is real sort of idol and who I look up to in a lot of ways for animation, in terms of what I consider a high mark of animation. And he spent pretty much his entire decade working on these films. And I picked the first one here, but really I think it's a representation of all three films within the trilogy, and maybe the fourth one upcoming, because I really, they're all fun. I really enjoy them. I still think, though, the first one is my favorite. And the movies are about Dracula, who runs a hotel for monsters, and in this one, he's trying to get a human who stumbles into the hotel to not fall in love with his daughter Mavis. And there's some sort of, it's a traditional sort of plot structure and mechanics, and there's some great fish out of water stuff, and sort of just monsters, humans interactions kind of elements with Johnny and some of the other monsters, and that are fun. But ultimately, I think what's great is what Genndy Tartakovsky brings that other animation doesn't bring, which is accentuating the elements of animation and really allowing animation to be animation. That in this movie, the physical comedy is just as large as the dialogue-based comedy, and this is because of how each different character is animated differently. Yes, they can do over-the-top gestures, like say any other animated movie, but even things to the way they move. So Dracula, how he glides, and Frankenstein, how he's much more limbering and slow and sluggish. Just the different types of way they move allow for different types of sort of physical humor and jokes. That there are some funny, silly jokes, but there are also some really terrific, great styles of physical humor. And I think for some reason a lot of modern day animation, maybe sort of DreamWorks and Pixar, because they're so dominant, have allowed for this sort of traditional, grounded, almost realistic kind of sense of animation. That yes, there's interesting worlds, but the characters still follow the laws of physics. But then when we see something like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, we go, wow, we can really do so much with the medium of animation, and it's such a revelation. But I think the Hotel Transylvania movies actually do that. They're almost more of a Looney Tunes style than, say, a Pixar style, that they allow for these large, over-exaggerated gestures to... And I think that's why you sort of connect to the movie, is that, yes, it's sort of silly and maybe a little bit meant for kids, so that element will like it, but I think if you're a fan of animation and an appreciator of animation, you'll actually get a lot of the funny physical jokes and appreciate just how different and unique the films actually are. And once again, it also confronts that theme of family, that, you know, the sort of father-daughter relationship between Mavis and Dracula, played brilliantly by Selena Gomez and Adam Sandler, who I actually forget it's them once we get later onto the films, because I think it's a secretly really fantastic performance, and we always get that bond, that familial connection between the two, and why it's so hard for Dracula to sort of let his young daughter go. So the whole trilogy is great. Some just terrific animation and different styles of animation that I think you'll be actually surprised. And I was when I saw this first movie, because I was like, this is kind of a kid's movie, but I'm really enjoying it. So maybe check it out. I think maybe for more of an adult, you still also may enjoy it the way I did. Then my next pick is The Kid Who Would Be King. A recent film that came out last year but didn't do too good at the box office. But yeah, it's from the follow-up from a great director, Joe Cornish, which his last film was the sci-fi, critically acclaimed Attack the Block. Now, in between then, he worked with Edgar Wright and co-wrote with him The Adventures of Tintin and Ant-Man, and did some of that stuff. So it was great to see him come back with sort of a movie that we don't that we don't see that often. Now, with a series like Stranger Things that has sort of co-opted and homage to death the movies of E.T. and Ghostbusters and Stand By Me, The Kid by King is following maybe a similar format, but it's less so nostalgia, retro-fueled, but just more so in its premise. That oftentimes we very rarely get live-action movies meant for kids that are about kids and kids doing the adventures. And this is actually a really terrific movie, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And the only reason why it's maybe not cracking the list is because it's more of a kids movie. I think it's designed for kids, less so than it is maybe for the entire family. And that's not to say you won't enjoy it, but I think you will get a significant difference between the enjoyment that kids have and, say, the enjoyment that adults has. And that still doesn't mean it's not a great movie. It is a great movie. Just in terms of the family and the constructions of this list, it didn't necessarily fit. However, the movie is great because it's about this kid who is the long-lost descendant of King Arthur, and he has to save the day from an awakening that this evil Rebecca Ferguson-played monster will come out when it senses the world is weak and will sort of strike back after King Arthur defeated her thousands of years ago. And it's a traditional sort of adventure movie, and this is sort of a subgenre of the family movie, that going on an adventure. The plot structure actually has a lot of video game type elements, which could be seen as a criticism, but I actually don't take it that way. I actually see it as a positive feature, that there's a quest, you have to learn to attack and to defend and to train, and there's sort of a propelling energy to it. And it's all about the kids. There's no real adults. There's some sort of themes of father figure elements, and there are themes that's not just a traditional adventure movie, but for the most part it is just the kids and their journey and them saving the day. And I think that formula has been greatly missed. It's a great version of that. It has some great set pieces, Helm's Deep style in the school later on. The film sometimes suffers from some CGI monsters, but that the themes also, I think, of King Arthur, of valor, of honor, of companionship, are injected nicely in sort of the modern day lens, and allowing that to be a central theme, as well as being the sort of father figure elements. And Louis Circus is really terrific here as the main protagonist, and carries a lot of the weight because there's not sort of a larger, I guess, adult figure to lean on. He really is able to carry a lot of the emotional weight and gathering the group together, and really becomes a leader throughout the film, and is really terrific in the film. So great sort of acting pieces, solid themes, and that translate the King Arthur myth to today, that are really terrific as well. Then my final honorable mention is Mirai, a movie that I wasn't sure would necessarily make the list because was it too family oriented, because it's a little bit more mature for younger kids. However, I ultimately decided to give it at least an honorable mention here because it's from the great Mamoru Hosoda, and because it is enough for kids, as well as being a really rewarding and terrific, rich experience for adults. Like I said, from director Mamoru Hosoda, who also has some other great, I would consider, family movies, also / action movies throughout this decade, whether it be The Boy and the Beast or The Wolf Children. He is interested in a director in family, but almost from different perspectives of that family. And Mirai is a story from the perspective of Kun, a small boy whose parents, and he's about to just had a baby, so he has now a baby sister. But the sort of trick and the hook of the movie is that when he goes into his garden in his backyard, he time travels into the past, into the future, and meets different versions of his family. Starting off with his baby sister, who they just had, who is so small, who he's very jealous of, he now sees as a full-on sort of an 18-year-old kid, and is able to talk to him. Later on, he meets a younger version of his grandfather, and in this sort of abstract, fantastical realism kind of a way, it confronts these themes of family, and confronts Kun's perspective and his way of looking at things, and teaches him a lot of things. This is ultimately a teaching movie that Kun will do something and be jealous, say, of his sister, but then when he meets a very older version of his sister who he can have a conversation with, he sort of understands things, or they allow to go to these sort of, and because of the fantastical elements, and because of the time traveling, they can use the medium of animation to fly when they want to, and sort of go into these crazy different worlds, and flashbacks and flash forwards. And in this abstract way, we're understanding the theme of learning from your past mistakes, or getting just a unique perspective of this kind of a story. And in a way, especially as an adult, you can't just reflect, of course, on your own life, but what if you had this experience, or what if you could see yourself in the future, or you could see one of your children grow much older and sort of get an interaction from that perspective? What would they have to say? What would you could sort of look back and learn from this moment? And because of this unique structure, I think it allows for not an existentialism, but just a reflection that it allows for a really interesting examination of the idea of family and your relationship within it. That, Kun is a young boy, so he doesn't realize that the world doesn't revolve around him, that he works within the machinations of a family unit, that people have different needs. And it's dealing with some of these larger, mature themes, but I still think there's, of course, great animation and great some fantastical sequences that the children will like as well. So the movie is great at seeing exploring this theme of family, seeing the generations of family, but also the family perspective, and seeing it from different family members' perspective. Or even, if your parents may have told you, back in my day, without the internet, I had to do this, and that. But now you can actually, in this sense, Kun can actually go back and see what it was really like, experience that just for a brief moment of time, and understand it and gain a new perspective. So for a movie about family, about perspectives, about the familial role and everyone's role within this sort of unit as a family, it's an interesting movie. It's a great reflective movie as well. And Mamoru Hosoda's films, I knew I had to get one of them at least on the list, even though they're a little bit more mature. I still think they're terrific family movies. Then my number 10 pick is The Muppets.
There's no movie like a Muppet movie. Jason Segel, Amy Adams, Kermit the Frog, and Miss Piggy.
Ow, that hurt!
The Muppets.
A delightful reboot of The Muppets back into popular consciousness with a retro-filled version of the movie from a fan's perspective. Now, the movie Of course, starting the Muppets, which were of course popular in the sort of 70s, mid 70s, gets to into the 90s, and had a great run. But especially in the 70s and the 80s, they had a significant pop culture iconography. That they were the Muppets, and they were just as famous as Steve Martin. However, I guess more in modern days, especially in 2011. They weren't as popular. So getting to see this sort of style of a story where there's this Muppet, who's not part of the Muppets, he's just a puppet named Walter, growing up in a small town with his brother Gary and eventually his wife Mary, who decide to go to LA on a vacation when they find out and learn that the Muppets are about to lose their studio and they have to raise $10 million to save it. But the Muppets are nowhere to be found, so Walter, Gary, and Mary find Kermit, and they find and have to get sort of the whole squad back together. So it's mirroring of course, the first Muppets movie, which is also a road movie. I think the movie, why I really enjoy it is because I think it captures at least what I've seen of the Muppets, of the Muppet spirit, of earnestness, of sincerity, and sort of confronting emotions head on. That they're not the Sesame Street, that it's not for small little children, that it is ultimately a family film for family members. That it's sometimes a little bit undercutting or winking at the beginning of some of the elements of the joyful, wonderful, idyllic small town, but as we sort of progress throughout the film, it really starts to lean more and more into the earnestness and the sincerity of the story. And I think it's easy to be cynical about the sort of style and sort of approach that this movie is taking. However, I think if you really sort of lean into the sincerity, the genuineness, the really over sentimentality in certain elements, like if you lean into that and you understand it and accept that, it can be a very rewarding experience. That the Muppets in themselves, I think, are still very funny and have, just great how they just move around. It is hilarious, and of just getting the game back together and some of the funny bits that occur with that, and seeing where they are, sort of how they've hit rock bottom, how they're big famous, and now they're sort of doing these dingy clubs or whatnot. Kermit, of course, being that sort of central leader figure, and then I like this sort of plot of seeing it from a fan's perspective. Walter, who really wants to get these guys back together, who is a puppet, who's not a Muppet, but is still trying to find his calling. It's also a great musical with some songs that actually stick with you past the movie. I love Amy Adams, and Jason Segel does a great job here, and they're both terrific at being sort of the innocent, sweet, but still struggling with their own issues, and never really a detriment to the story. That sometimes if you have the human characters, you have to have the human characters, because sometimes the Muppets can't sustain maybe a full movie on themselves, or it'd be a little bit too unreal, we'll say, but they never really get in the way. That I never feel that their storyline is not as good as the main storyline, but I still sort of like both of them, and they work in harmony in that sense. So also bright, beautiful color palette, which is just terrific to look at. There's great sort of a studio backlight kind of a feel. I think it's a movie that succeeds at trying to bring you joy, and it's designed to do that, just for maximum joy and maximum happiness. And if we can appreciate a movie like Manchester by the Sea, which is trying to explore the theme of grief and sadness, that we could also, on the other hand, really appreciate a movie like Muppets, which is appealing to everyone, which has, jokes that I was even laughing at that aren't silly, but are just sort of heartwarming and sweet. And this is a sweet movie that should try to inject joy in life. And I think at the very least you'll get a little bit of that, and I think it succeeds at what it's trying to do. Then my number 9 pick is Love and Peace.
Love and Peace.
This is one of the strangest movies I have ever seen, yet it's still a great family movie nonetheless. A live-action fantasy film from Japanese director Shion Sono, who, if you've seen some of his other movies, are really hard to describe or to explain, because he does things with the medium of film that no other filmmaker does. And every time I watch one of his movies, especially this movie, I'm reminded that actually you can do so much with the realm of film. And even though his later films, especially like Love and Peace, because he's making so many movies every year, have sort of been relegated to, oh yeah, it's one of those kind of movies, but he hasn't necessarily gained the large, maybe cult status I think yet to someone like Takashi Miike. But that doesn't mean his movies still aren't great. And Love and Peace is really terrific and a great fantasy movie, but also a great family movie. And it's this very much a genre blending, strange kind of a movie. It's a live action fantasy, rock, opera, romance, family film about a lonely desk clerk who creates a relationship with a turtle and bonds with that. Then eventually, as they goes their separate ways later on in the film, trying to reconnect and get them back together. The film is almost structured, and why I think it's great because he does. So Sean Sono does so many great things with the medium of film that the story structure is very strange, and you never know where it's going to go. So in a way, that's an appeal of the movie, especially as an older adult member. That you're sort of on edge because you're like, where is this really going? But as a kid, you're not confused necessarily. It's because it almost has a kid-like logic in the sense that this happens, and then this happens, and then that happened, and sort of the way almost a child sort of tells a story. The film happens. It has a sort of scatterbrain kind of a style that it's one movie and then it gets bored of being that movie and then it's something else. And like the Muppets, later on there's some great puppetry, not a lot of CGI, but a lot of great puppetry with the sort of the creatures and characters that the turtle runs into in the second half of the movie, which is sweet and genuine. But and I think I want to stress that the movie is strange, but it's not a trippy psychedelic style strange. It is sweet, it's genuine, and it's so imaginative. It's visually bold, it's stylistic. I think I can tell you that it's one of the strangest movies I've ever seen. It's probably one of the strangest movies you will ever see. It's a different style of movie because it's just something that you haven't seen before. But I think there's actually a reward to that if you've seen a lot of movies that I have, when you see something like this, which is completely different, after seeing all these movies all the time, you see something new and different, it's exciting. And I think for a lot of people, they can feel a similar way, that it is funny, it is exciting, it's visually bold, it's different, it's colorful. It's almost like a live action anime with just the large over-the-top reactions and movements and whip pans and style of story that's being told. Yet you completely buy into it the entire time, and you never sort of lose the realism of it. It's just sort of more of a fantastical version of our real life and maybe the way we perceive the world, or way almost our mind thinks the world. When we're looking back on events, sometimes we'll think about it as, oh my god, it was so embarrassing. But at the time, no one really knew it was embarrassing. In a way, this movie is trying to encapsulate this sort of heightened version of every scene, the most visually stylistic, bold, and interesting and colorful way of doing that in what a weird sort of story. But the film still works with the relationship with Picadon, the turtle, and the sort of romance that happens, not with the turtle, but with the girl later on. And there's still a genuine connection, or sort of that person, a pet connection. So it has sort of a sweetness to it that I think qualifies it for a family film, and great puppetry and great creatures, and I think you'll be screaming Picadon for the entirety of the movie, especially in the last third act. It's just a terrific, strange movie, but delightful in every sense of the word. Then my number 8 pick is The Christmas Chronicles.
An hour before the sun rises.
Whoa. Let's get this party started. We have a Ram auto.
Yeah, you just like wave your hand and Jedi mind trick the cops?
I'm Santa Claus, Teddy, not Yoda.
Okay, that's enough fun for one night.
Are you listening?
Comet, you can slow down!
Come back here!
Christmas movies count, right? If Halloween is a holiday that is all about horror movies, then the Christmas holiday is all about family movies and having just a sweet, delightful, joyful time. And I think maybe that's the divide of some people who really like Halloween versus the people who like Christmas. Personally, I'm a Christmas guy, and I love Christmas movies, sort of habitually, obsessively rewatching them every time the season rolls around to get me in the season, and even sometimes in July just to get a little bit of a joy and sort of a differentiator and sort of looking to that season. And I think for me, The Christmas Chronicles, which debuted on Netflix and is a Netflix movie, will actually, even though it only came out a couple of years ago, I think will be eventually in the rotation of my Christmas movies. That some people, there's Elf and Home Alone. I think The Christmas Chronicles will sort of fit into that nicely as well, because of how unabashedly unafraid it is to be a Christmas movie and just totally be interested in that sort of style and that atmosphere. The plot's very traditional. You've seen it a million times before, where these kids try to catch Santa Claus and then find him and accidentally or purposely get into his sleigh, which accidentally causes him to crash, and now they need to fix his sleigh and find his hat and get the reindeers back so that Christmas isn't ruined. And the film succeeds in large part because, like I said, of that tone and that atmosphere of just realizing that it's a Christmas movie and having fun with it, having fun with the sort of all-in-one night kind of a movie, which I really appreciate and I've always connected to. But really because of Kurt Russell, who plays Santa Claus, who is a different style of Santa Claus, and not this. I never realized that he's the Santa Claus I've been waiting for. He got the big bushy gray beard and long white hair. He is funny because he'll give it to you straight, that there's no sort of hey, being nice and sweet and old, that he's old but he's still spry and can do things, and that he says, hey, you guys, you're gonna ruin Christmas, like I need that stuff. Like, he's in a sort of serious tone, but that doesn't mean later on he's a mean Santa Claus. He'll say it to you straight and earnest, but that doesn't mean he'll not teach you the lessons and do it in a sweet way, in an honest way. I think the film is also interested and allows for the mythical, magical elements of Santa Claus, where he knows everybody and knows what they wanted and all the different intimate details of their life and everything like that, and has a lot of fun with that, that the police officers or in the diner sort of a restaurant scene. And the movie has these sort of great wacky kind of adventures, for chasing the reindeer, driving in the Camaro, getting arrested, playing the blues in the jail cell, some interesting cute CGI creatures, which maybe the young kids will relate to. I think the brother-sister relationship will often sort of connect to a lot of the kid family members, the single mom, death of the father kind of relationship, maybe for more of the adults, and then of course Santa. It's for everybody. It is a family movie because it's a movie that everyone can watch, and I think everyone, even if you're an adult and if you grew up with Santa and that sort of mythological idealized figure, that's almost a strange part of North American or Western society, I guess, is still something that you will connect to, because you will sort of feel that childlike energy within the film, and the score will sort of sweep and be grand and grandiose every chance it gets to really just emphasize the situations and really try to manipulate you, but it works totally. And I love Christmas movies for that reason, because they are in a way just unabashedly manipulative and trying to be totally sentimental, but when they work and they make you cry and they make you feel great and just make you a huge smile on your face. So it's got all these great elements and done real perfectly, really anchor on the sense of Kurt Russell being Santa Claus, and you just want to see him do stuff and see more of him. Supposedly there's a Christmas Chronicles 2 coming out, so I can't wait for that, and I think the Christmas Chronicles will be a movie that people will rewatch for hopefully decades to come. Then my number 7 pick is How to Train Your Dragon.
Go.
DreamWorks How to Train Your Dragon.
Similar to Hotel Transylvania, I chose the first How to Train Your Dragon here, but it's really a representation of the entire great trilogy that is the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy. But yeah, I still enjoy the first one the most. This one about a young teen boy named Hiccup, who lives in a village that kills dragons, that always has a war sort of going on with dragons, but never really feels in place, never feels like they're doing it the right way. Always tries to get these inventions working, but when one of his inventions work and he catches the Night Fury, the sort of legendary dragon that they've been trying to kill for years, he starts to train it and to start to heal it back to health, and starts to develop a bond and a connection with that film. And why I like How to Train a Dragon is really similar to maybe Pixar, but in a larger sense is the pitch perfect storytelling. And it's hard to really have a great sort of pacing and character development and everything that the How to Train Your Dragon series does. Of course, there's that central connection between Hiccup and eventually the Night Fury named Toothless, and their kind of relationship. And we've seen this idea of a boy and an animated figure and their sort of connection, whether it be Iron Giant or whatnot. It's something we've seen over and over again, but I think this one is less so the boy and his dog kind of element, but maybe because Toothless is less so, I think, at least how I interpret it, is like less of a pet and more almost like an alien or a friend, that they are almost on equal footing, equal level. That yes, he's loyal, that he appreciates him, but that doesn't mean he's going to be there for him necessarily the entire time. That when, even when Hiccup tries to put a new tail on him, it's not immediately obedience and loyalty that maybe, say, a dog would. There are sort of still a skepticism and a hesitance and an intelligence there that he will save, the Toothless will save Hiccup just as many times as Hiccup will help and save Toothless and defend him. So there's a great structure and pacing of the movie as Hiccup learns more about Toothless, and then using that to do his training lessons with some of the other teens, and really a terrific cast overall with great voice acting. But I think that Hiccup, unlike some other movies that and movies that focus on teens or kids, is that oftentimes they don't give them enough to do. That they're passive members of the story. That things just happen to them, and the adults sort of have things going, and they sort of just stumble into a world. But in this case, Hiccup has initiative and has his own character growth and his own sort of actions that he's able to do because of his training. That's his sort of world. That he struggles with his father, Stoic, who wants to have him be this great ultimate warrior fighter, who has these expectations that he should be something that he's just not. So Hiccup wants to, struggle that from his dad, but then still has his own kind of world of learning with Toothless and develop it with him. That there's this father-son sort of disconnect, but it's not just because Toothless just stumbled into this sort of situation, that he actually learns and builds and uses his strength and takes initiative to nurse the Night Fury Toothless back into health and to really develop a bond with him. So it's easy to say it has great storytelling, that's fine, but then also great pacing, and also great character development and sort of internal character struggle, and all the characters should be great. And there's actually a really terrific score by John Powell, who actually we may be talking about more next genre in the next couple of weeks with the best score series, but it's this really sweeping score in the second half, but in the first half it's smaller and it's quieter, so that when the second half sort of occurs and once we hit that flying at the beginning, it's grand and it's sweeping. It's just as moving and triumphant as the bike flying over in, say, E.T. I think that it's easy to say it just has great storytelling, but it has all these elements. It has a great score. It has a great world. Just this idea of the village and all the different types of dragons, and the mythology, which they explore later on. But just this sort of small island village that is from their perspective, and it's almost a smaller story, and their sort of ability to connect and with the dragons through Hiccup. A great world with great storytelling and great character development, and it's really it's easy to say that this just has a great story, but I really want to focus on the fact that this is a really pitch perfectly paced great story that I really just recommend to everyone, and that's hard to do, and I think How to Train Your Dragon succeeds in almost and pretty much every front, and delivers and just making a terrific story. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know some of your favorite family films, or predict maybe my number one, or some of the other family films that you'd like to see. That's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.